Hi,
Hi,
Steve.
Joe.
How are you,
How
sir?
are you? Very good, thank you.
I'm excellent, man. This is such an honor. Thank you so much for taking a minute out. I appreciate
Oh,
it.
no problem.
Yeah, I just got to say, I know we try to be as objective as possible in this realm of broadcasting, but you absolutely were one of my favorite faces to see on TV and the radio. You were always positive. You were always on top of the game. There was a level of paint that you had on your brush that was totally different from anybody else, and I truly miss your voice being out there on the radio and the TV.
Well, I appreciate that. And, I know how difficult it is to be successful at sports, and particularly in a small market like Kansas City. So that's why I want to be honest about my play-by-play, but I also want to be understanding of the challenges that teams face. And that's why 14 and 15 were so remarkable to see a team go to back-to-back World Series who are from a smaller market. And it's different in the NFL, NBA, NHL because um, they have balance, they have equity, they have a salary cap, and we don't have that in Major League Baseball. And I really thought that was going to be what the 2022 strike was about,
Yeah.
and they didn't really address it. They just said, "Okay, the Yankees and Dodgers, they have the most money, and their chances are going to be better than the rest." And that's why 14 and 15 were really extremely special in my sports career.
Well, I think the interesting thing that's going on right now is that the amount of money the Dodgers paid in the offseason was astronomical. If you match that up next to every other team, it was head and shoulders above. But then there was all this rumbling about the Royals this year. And now we're looking at the Royals actually coming to fruition. There is that 14-15 excitement. Salvi hit a home run a couple weeks ago and did a curtain call. And I hadn't heard the stadium like that since that era. I mean, did you were you hip on that too?
You know what? I heard about it, but I really didn't have a chance to see it. We moved to when I retired. My wife and I moved to Evergreen, Colorado, which we absolutely love. And
Yeah.
I grew up in Kansas City, went to Shawnee Mission North, went to K State, but this was a time where I have my wife's my best friend, and then I go, "Where do you want to go?" And she goes, "I knew where she wanted to go to the Rocky Mountains."
Yeah.
So we're happy. This is like a new adventure for us, and um, but this spring training, I was actually going on a national park trip, and I took my dog and and we met my wife in Southern California. On the drive back, we stopped by spring training, and I talked to JJ Piccolo, our general manager, and he was telling me, he goes, "We knew what we needed from last year. We needed pitching, so we went out and got Michael Wacha. Seth Lugo has been amazing." Um, and but the number one thing, and I told him this when I saw him, I said, "I am so glad you signed Bobby Witt Jr. because he's going to be one of the greats, and he's a great kid too. And an organization, a small market team, needs to be able to sign their stars. And now Bobby's going to be like George Brett; he'll be with the organization forever." And I
Absolutely.
love that. But he's a great kid, and I know his mom and dad, and they're great people too. So this is a time where they're climbing.
Yeah.
They're not as good as the Yankees or the Dodgers yet, but they could do some things, and we'll see where they are after the All-Star break.
Yeah. So before we kind of go back in time to the kid from Nebraska that grew up and became this broadcaster and saw the world doing it, I gotta wonder, do you miss being in the booth? Is there a part of you, even in retirement, being in the mountains of Colorado and relishing this wonderful career you had? Is there a part of you that's like, man, that's my native habitat?
I did it for 47 years, and I was absolutely addicted to play-by-play. I did football, basketball, and baseball through the years. Absolutely loved it. But then I found out the last couple of years, I know this might sound a little odd, probably not, but like I said, I've been married 38 years, and I have a great friendship, and I was really missing her more and more the last 2 years. And then we also have three granddaughters. Our daughter's married, lives in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and she and our middle granddaughter came down to see me to do a White Sox Royals game, and the three of us had such a great time I said to myself, I go, I want more of this. I don't want less of this. I'm really close with my daughter. I'm really close with my granddaughters. And we had such a great time that the next day when I got back to Kansas City, I immediately went to the boss and I told him in August of 2022, this is my strategy. This is my feeling. And I said, I wanted to share with him the joy I had with my daughter and granddaughter. And I also wanted to let them know that rather than tell them in November where they're going, oh, who are we going to get? They could get a broadcaster as awesome as Jake Eisenberg. And I've long been a fan of his. And now he was able to graduate from AAA with Omaha to the big leagues. And as I told him when I called him to congratulate him when he got the job, I said, hey, I just want you to know, Jake, that my mom used to tell me the two most important decisions you'll make in your life are what do you want to be when you grow up? And who do you want to spend the rest of your life with? And I said, Jake, I've hit grand slams on both of those. And he very sweetly said, you know, Steve, my fiance is sitting next to me, and she's got a big smile after what you just said. So, and that's what it's all about. And that's when you talked about being positive. You know, obviously, I grew up loving Kansas City, loving the Chiefs, loving the A's first, then the Royals. So, uh, do I miss the game? I don't miss the travel. I don't miss all of but I miss my friends.
Yeah.
I miss Ryan. I miss Rex. I miss Joel. I miss Monty. I miss Denny and Stu and Eric Guthrie and the guys in the booth and Dave Holtzman. Um, but that said, this is a new adventure. And with the books that I've written 4 books. I just finished my 5th. That's my new quest,
And
my
that's
new
the thing.
passion.
And that's the thing that always came through from you was that you always held family in high regard. And we get one trip around the sun here. And that's the thing. You know what I'm saying? And you have your dreams and you have your time. You've earned it. And Jake's wonderful. Like I had no idea where the adventure would go, but sometimes it's like poetry when he starts laying out the way Candlestick Park looks and he explains the clouds and the birds. There's something that's different about what he does, and you can feel the exuberance. I feel like he's a 9-year-old kid sitting next to Denny processing
Absolutely.
that 85 call. Like he is there living the dream.
You're exactly right. I mean, I go back to 1985 when I started, and I was doing the Cincinnati Reds, but I don't think I had done a Reds game. And the year before, I was in the booth in Riverfront, and one of my heroes came up to me, Jack Buck of the St. Louis Cardinals,
Yeah.
and Jack said, "Hey, Steve, I have to do an event. Uh, it may have been tomorrow, but he goes, would it be possible for you to fill in and work for me and Mike Shannon?" And I thought, absolutely. And what you're talking about is the same thing that Jake was feeling. When I sat down next to Mike Shannon and worked with him a major league game for the first time, I got pins and needles and thinking, this is what my passion, my quest has been my entire life, and now I'm here. I'm now at the major league level. And then fast forward that the next no, it was that summer in '85. I was working not only for the Reds, but I was also working for Sports Time Cable Network, and they asked me to do a game in Kansas City. And that was the year the Royals won their first world championship. And my hero, of course, was George Brett. And George hit a 3-run home run that tied the game in the 7th inning. And I remember as he's rounding the bases, and I was looking down at the stands and going, oh my gosh, this is magical. This is magnificent. And I just saw one of my heroes hit a home run, and I called his shot. And that victory, obviously, was part of their success in '85, and they would go on to beat the Cardinals in 7.
So the one thing that about anybody that gets into a profession, it's the shoulders that you stand on, the giants of who was that broadcaster for you? Who did you look forward to? Who was someone that you either emulated or loved listening to?
Well, obviously, Fred and Denny. Fred White became my mentor. He was a tremendous man, very influential when I was at Kansas State University, and he was the voice of the Wildcats. But when you live in the Midwest and you can take that AM dial and listen to everybody from Ernie Harwell in Detroit, But like I said, Jack Buck in St. Louis was one of my all-time favorites. I just loved his style. I loved his humor. And then as I got to grow and watch games on the national level and listen to a guy like Vin Scully, in my opinion, is the greatest baseball broadcaster of all time. And when I did the Angels for 14 years, I got to know Vin very well because we had the Freeway series. And he is one of the coolest guys to be around, just very, very thoughtful, one of the great storytellers in the history of our game. And it was one of the great rewards and honors I had to just sit not only and talk with him about baseball, but after the games, we might have a glass of wine together as Dodger Stadium cleared out. And we could talk about how he grew up, about stickball in New York, about, running around in Brooklyn. And then later, becoming one of the elite broadcasters of all time.
So I'm curious about your life as a writer. You pen such wonderful stories. When did this start for you? How did this other part of your life begin and become this passion of yours?
Well, I've always been a reader, so I always took books on the road. And then, of course, when Kindle was invented, I could take 40 books on the road and open them up. And Joe, I didn't read sports books. Of course, I did with the media guides, etc. But when I was laying in bed, I was reading the classics. I love John Steinbeck, and now I love Diana Gabaldon of Outlander fame, and I've become friends with her. Just my wife reaching out, connecting us, and uh, Kristen Hanna, Sue Monk Kidd are just great writers, and so I like to read people who could tell great stories. That's why I liked listening to Jack Buck and to Vin Scully and to Fred White and to Denny Matthews, because they too were great storytellers. But as far as the written word, it's an interesting story because I took my wife on a vacation to Italy in 2006, and I kid you not, we are in southern Tuscany, staying at a bed and breakfast, and I had a vivid dream of a great walled city and two families struggling to produce a great wine, and a woman coming from town to help them out. And well, the next day, well, actually, that night, instead of going back to sleep, I went to the bathroom, wrote down the outline, and I told my wife about it the next day. I had this dream, and she goes, "That's cool." And then we went and visited Venice and Florence, and then a week later, after that dream, we were going to visit, connect with three other couples in the town of Lucca, Italy. And as we're driving in, I look at it and I go, "Oh my God, Stacy, this is it. These are the walls I saw in my dream. And if you drive around this way, there'll be a portal that you can enter, and then you can go down to the right, and there'll be a market." And everything came true.
Wow.
We turned around the one side, there was a portal of entry. We parked the car, we walked about a block, there was the market, and that became the market of one of my protagonists in the book, The Walls of Lucca. My fictional character, Isabella Rosselli, who had a little market there in the Mercato of Lucca, Italy. And the more I read about Italy, because obviously it piqued my interest when I had this dream, and then I come to realization, and I bought a book on the history of Lucca, and it was a fascinating story of a town that had three walls built around it. At one time, Lucca was the number two banking capital in all of Europe, and at the end of the Silk Trade Center. So they had a ton of money. And what happens when you have a ton of money? You have fears that someone's going to take it away. So they built three walls: the pre-Christian walls, the medieval walls, and the Renaissance walls. And over 2,200 years of these walls, the interesting thing is, Lucca was never attacked. No
Wow.
one ever attacked Lucca. And the psychobabble in my mind thought, do we do that to ourselves? Do we build these invisible walls around us to protect us from fears that may not even happen?
Yeah.
So I took a difficult time. Two families trying to produce a great wine in Italy's dark days of World War I, the rise of fascism, and Benito Mussolini. So the Walls of Lucca begins from 1914 to 1930, and then Above the Walls picks up the family's plight in 1938 after Benito Mussolini writes his Manifesto of Race, which solidified his union with Adolf Hitler in Germany, and how it affected the citizens of Italy, the agriculture, the farmers. And it too. Both of them are love story slash historical fiction. But I was blessed. You know, when you write your first book, you're going, I don't think it's very good.
Right.
But The Walls of Luca won Best Historical Fiction in 2018 by Reader's Favorite and Reader's Views. And then in 2019, we won again for Above the Walls. And then the shocking one came with my book about baseball. It's baseball, family, action, adventure, political intrigue, walks with the wind. That won the Writer's Digest Grand Prize in 2021. And I even asked the guy, I said, how did I win? He goes, Steve, your story is totally different. It has no genre, but it is about a young man who is on a vision quest. And I went to the Southern Ute Reservation in Southwest Colorado to work with their elders because, Joe, I wanted to make sure it was not a white man writing about
Yeah.
a First Nations person's story. It was simply an author writing about a young man's vision quest. And I worked with the Sundance chief, Hanley Frost. I worked with the director of the Cultural Center, and they loved it so much that they are selling it now in their Cultural Center, which is
Wow.
a great pat on the back because I wanted to make sure I was both accurate and respectful of their community and
Yeah.
culture.
Absolutely. How did this acumen of being a writer and constructing these worlds and stories lend to the voice that you put out on the air? It seems like those two would have to have been enhanced.
Well, it is about storytelling because as a broadcaster, you're telling the story that is happening in the moment. That's what a play by play broadcaster does. We can prepare as much as possible, but then we have to let the game tell us what to say. Now, when you're writing fiction, you can create characters that follow. But the one thing I found out about historical fiction, I have to make sure my characters are at a certain site when something historic happens. Let's say the Mussolini's March on Rome, which was much like our insurrection on January 6th. They had an insurrection that was successful. And so I have to make sure my characters are at a specific spot when this happens. Or if there's a battle that happens, they have to be there and I have to maneuver their but I do want to go back because there is a specialness in sports and what I'm trying to do. Because one thing that drew me to storytelling and play by play broadcasting was when I physically saw young people give up their give up their ego, leave it in the locker room, and play for each other.
Yeah.
And the greatest example in my life was our Kansas City Royals in 2014 and 2015. When Rex Hudler and I got there in 2012, I remember calling Rex the year before we got the job and saying, hey, Hud, I think we're getting there at the right time. This team of Eric Hosmer and Mike Moustakas and Salvador Perez, all of these minor leaguers and Kelvin Herrera, et cetera, I said, they're winning at A ball and double A and triple A. And they're going to falter a little bit when they come up as rookies do. But I said, there seems to be a unity on this team. And then to travel with the guys, to see it in action, to see the leadership of an Eric Hosmer, the way he held guys accountable, the way Lorenzo Cain loved Alex Gordon, and Alex Gordon loved Mike Moustakas, and Mike Moustakas loved Alcides Escobar, and Escobar loved Eric Hosmer, and Hosmer loved Salvador Perez, and they all worked together. And there was that unity in 14 and 15. And here's a stat that I just found fascinating. This is a team that finished last offensively in home runs and last in walks in that 2-year period. And they went to back-to-back World Series and won a championship. The only way you do that is through unity. These guys loved each other. And the mantra that I loved most was, I got your back. And I remember Alex Gordon saying that to Jason Vargas after Alex made this tremendous catch to rob J.J. Hardy of a double in Game 4 of the ALCS in 2014. And when he left the celebratory mosh pit in the dugout, I was right there because I was doing work for TBS. And I saw Alex turn around and look at Jason Vargas and say, I got your back. And that whole season of 14 and again in 2015 was guys who had each other's back. And when you see that and you do that, magical things happen. And as Rex Hudler would say, it was a beautiful thing.
Speaking of Rex, to be around someone like that, I listen to all these different broadcasts from all of the different teams. There's something special about Rex. He brings out the best of everyone around him, and he just has this his heart shows in a way that's different. I don't know if I'm subjective because I've listened to so many games, but there's this, I mean, I've met him before and he's the same way. It's like he's
Yeah,
larger than life. Like
he
you get
is.
away from him, you're like, I just thought this was on TV, but it really is him. That's how he
And
rolls.
he's one of my best friends in the business because we started together in 1996. That was his best year as a player in the major leagues. He had a terrific year for the Angels, and I was their first year broadcast. That was my first year broadcasting the Angels, and it was not a very good team. But every single day, I think they lost 95, 96 games that year, but every single day, Rex would come in with this enthusiasm, and you go, is this real? But the more I was with him, the more it was real. And then my first 3 years with the Angels, my broadcast partners were the great Hall of Famer Sparky Anderson and also an excellent pitcher in Jerry Royce. But when Rex retired and Sparky also moved on, the Angels chose to put us together. So I was the first one to work with Rex, and we had a blast. And early, obviously, he was nervous, and his opens would take forever. But you could tell this guy was going to be special. And I think what makes him special is his passion, his
Yeah.
enthusiasm, his love of the game, and also his love of people. And that comes across. And when we got to Kansas City for the first time, he took a little criticism because he was so different from
Yeah.
their earlier color commentators. And I used to tell people, I said, just wait until this team starts winning. You will absolutely love him. And that's what happened. And I think in 14 and 15 and 16 and 17, I remember people in the stands holding up signs of HUDisms, whether it's pilot to bombardier or shock the house or whatever it was. People loved him
Yeah.
because he is so enthusiastic and
Mhm.
so passionate, particularly when his team is winning.
So when you look at your career, what was the time frame where you had the most growth, where you got ready and groomed to come and broadcast for a world championship team? Was there a time in your life, in your career, that there was exponential growth?
Well, I knew when I graduated from Kansas State University that I needed to take the slow road. I was not nearly as talented as, say, a guy like Bob Costas when he graduated from Syracuse. He went straight to the major leagues. He was the broadcaster for the St. Louis Hawks, the ABA team at the time, and worked for KMOX, a big radio station. I knew that I did not have those kinds of skills. I didn't have the Bob Costas talent, but I knew that I needed to take a step up each level. So my passion was to start at a low level. And Fred White, I think I told you, was my mentor. And Fred says he didn't do this, but I believe he did. I think he called ahead to the radio station because the radio station he started at was KHAS in Hastings, Nebraska. And my goal was to start there too. Small station. I knew I'd make low money. I did have opportunities for more money in bigger markets, but it wasn't play by play. Well, I got the job in Hastings, worked there 2 years. I did 200 play by play events in a 2 year period. And the way I looked at it was like, this is like getting my master's degree. I'll be here 2 years, I'll graduate, and I got a little bit of money. It was $6,000 a year, not that much. But then I got promoted to WIBW in Topeka, Kansas, which was a tremendous opportunity for me because then I got to go into TV sportscasting. I became the voice of my alma mater, the Kansas State Wildcats, when Fred moved from Kansas State to ESPN and also did the Kansas City Royals. And that was a tremendous opportunity, a larger market, but continuing to do play by play at the high school, at the NAI level with Washburn University, and of course for my Kansas State Wildcats, and to broadcast a team where I absolutely loved their coach, Jack Hartman. So that was an incredible opportunity for me as well. And then my next step was Cincinnati, Ohio. That was a medium-sized market. That's where I met my wife, Stacy. She was a sports anchor at Sports Time Cable Network. We got married. I did the Reds and the Bengals there. And then, as you know, your career path isn't always like this.
Yeah.
But the station I worked with, WLWT, when I joined it in 1982, we were last in the ratings. But our news anchor became, while I was there, Jerry Springer. And Jerry took us to the top. I mean, it was a foursome that they put together. Jerry, Pat Barry is the weatherman, Norma Rashid, the co-anchor, and me, the sportscaster, and we went together to the top. And then my boss called me in and said, "Hey, I don't want you going off on the road when we're in ratings, so I'm only going to offer you the job as a sports anchor. I don't want you doing the Reds and the Bengals." And I was devastated because my wife and I had recently married and we just adopted our first child. And you know, I'm a husband and a father now, and I've got to be responsible. But when I drove home and told my wife what the opportunity was, I should tell you that I had a friend who hired me in Cincinnati, who had then moved to San Francisco and was the director of broadcasting for the Golden State Warriors. And he had shown one of the general managers in the area my tape. And he said, "Oh, I like Steve Physioc. I've seen his work before. I'll hire him 1 day a week." So I had the opportunity of working 1 day a week or taking this full-time job, 6 figures. I turned it down. Actually, it was my wife saying, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I want to do play-by-play." And she goes, "Well, then that's what we have to do because I don't want to live with an unhappy man." So we actually went out to San Francisco, and Joe, it just seemed like it was one of those let go, let God moments. When you get out of the way, and that didn't mean I didn't hustle, because I did hustle. I called a friend at KGO Radio. I did some vacation relief there. I worked 1 day a week at KTVU, the Fox affiliate in the area. And eventually, within 3 months, the general manager calls me in and said, "I'm going to put you on the Giants games." That was 1987. And the Giants won the West that year, and I
Yeah.
had the call. And so when the season ended, he let go of the previous play-by-play broadcaster for the Giants, hired me to do the KTVU games. And then I was also doing college football and basketball for Fresno State. And everything fell into place. And after that, 2 years later, I was doing the Golden State Warriors, and then ESPN came after me. I was with, ESPN for 7 years. Loved that. And then Fox came after me in 1996, and I was with them ever since. And then, of course, coming to the Royals in 2012, and that was a blessing because my mom was getting older, and I got to be with her when she made her transition, and she obviously raised us in Kansas City and was really close to my mom. But almost as important as that was the broadcasting the team I loved. Growing up in Kansas City,
Yeah.
watching them win it in '85, and now being the broadcaster and being in the booth when they won it in 2015 was fantastic.
So, of all of these accolades and all of these places that you've been in your life, between writing and broadcasting, what award caught you off guard, or what is it that you've done that you're the proudest of?
Well, the one that caught me off guard the most was this writing because, as I said, Joe, I only did one thing for 47 years. That
Yeah.
was do play-by-play broadcasting. Yes, I did sportscasting, but the whole avenue was towards play-by-play. And then when I tried I tried to be a writer. That was shocking because when I set my work off, the walls of Luke off first, and you send it to reviewers, whether it's Kirkus or Reader's Views or Reader Favorites or whoever it might be, and you get that first review back, their criticism, and you're going, "Oh my gosh, what's this going to be like?" Hey, they liked it. They liked it a lot. They gave me 5 stars. So that was shocking because it was something I didn't do. As I said, my broadcast career was always in steps. Small market Hastings, uh, bigger market in Topeka, medium market in Cincinnati, major market in San Francisco, then Los Angeles, another major market. So that was kind of like, I expected it.
Yeah.
That was my path. That was my passion. But as a writer and a storyteller, um, that was interesting. But there are some things that I did tie together. I share with you about what happens when people are of service over self in baseball and basketball and football. When I saw guys really care as much about their teammate as they did themselves, amazing things happen. So that's what I did with my writing. As an example, with the Walls of Luca, every single one of my characters has some kind of unforgiveness that they're holding on to. Like I said, the Walls of Luca, they have these walls around them,
Yeah.
whether it was the wine owner who had a challenge with his father and has held on to that grievance ever since he was a little boy. And his wife was unfaithful with him. And she also wanted to be part of the new fascist party. And so she had these grievances, this unforgiveness. And my hero, Isabella Rosselli, the young woman from town, she comes in, and some, it only takes a year or two. Others, it may take 2 decades to chip away those walls, those barriers that keep us from becoming the people or the team we want them to be. And in this case, Isabella, coming from a sports vernacular, was my coach. And she was the one who brought these egos, these individual people together so they could produce a great wine that was well respected and would bring these families together.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, everyone has a perception of you. Family, friends, fans, readers, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I think I'm a kind person. And I use that line because I think it's very underrated. And Sparky Anderson was one of my greatest mentors, and I would only work with him for 3 years, but we knew each other longer than that because I used to broadcast games, obviously, when my team would play his Detroit Tigers, or when I got to know him in Cincinnati when he would come back. But he had a great saying. He said, "The greatest investment of all time is kindness, and it don't cost a dime." He didn't have the greatest grammar or English, but I thought that was perfect. And it don't cost a dime.
Yeah.
And when you are simply kind to another person, even if they're not kind back, it's your responsibility to be kind to them, and perhaps your kindness will wear them down. But my mom used to say that to me. She said, "Be kind to everyone. If they're kind back," and I'm talking about going back to kindergarten when I'd have a struggle in the schoolyard, and I'd tell her about it. And she said, "Be kind to everyone. If they're kind back, you have another friend. And if they're not kind back, then you probably didn't want them as a friend anyway. But it's your job to be kind to everyone." And so that has always been my mantra. And I think if you look at life through that lens, you'll be able to be honest, but also uplifting, and be ready for those moments like when the Royals win a championship in 2015.
Well, I tell you what, this is an apropos way to wrap everything up. Your latest book, Catching the Wind, The Further Adventures of Sam Cloud Carson. If anyone wants to pick up this book, your other books, hire you to speak anywhere, what's the good business? Where can they go?
Well, they can reach out to me at stevephysioc.com, or they can message me on Facebook. It's so interesting because Walks with the Wind and Catching the Wind is a Kansas City story,
Yeah.
because my protagonist, Sam Cloud Carson, even though he's from Southwest Colorado, in the first book, that's basically the crucifixion of this young man, because I wanted him to represent the Native American culture where everything was taken away, their people, their food, their land, and even their religion. And they were, matter of fact, until 1978, it was illegal for a First Nations person to practice their own faith, which I thought was extremely tragic. So I wanted Sam, by taking everything away from him, to represent their culture, even though it's a story. It's about a story about a young man's quest to make it to the major leagues, and he gets sidetracked by many, many tragedies, and how he comes together to find himself, his quest. And the second book, Catching the Wind, that does most of it does take place in Kansas City, where Sam gets his opportunity to play for our Royals, and it's about the same era in that 14-15, but I wanted to make a little bit different. But there's a lot that goes on. I mean, I don't want to tell you where Sam goes, but he but just to give you an indication of the story's background, being in sports, I've always been fascinated by individuals whose excellence heightens when they're alone. And maybe the greatest example for me is a pitcher he's on the mound. Mm-hmm. He's alone. There's guys on base. They're taking leads. People in the dugout are yelling at him. People in the stands. And the great ones, the guy I use as my example for Sam Cloud Carson, Greg Maddux, have that unique ability to wipe out all that white noise, that distraction, and totally focus on their target. And Greg Maddux was beautiful. To him, it was always location, movement with velocity third. And he was one of the greatest pitchers I've ever seen, and an absolute magician at getting guys out. So Sam Cloud Carson is kind of like my Greg Maddux. But the other profession is a wildlife tracker. When they are alone, their abilities heighten. They need to be alone to be able to read nature. So he has the ability to narrow his bubble, to throw the baseball where he wants to, but he also has this ability to open his awareness bubble, to read nature, sights, sounds, smells, and also to trust his instincts. But Sam's weakness is his spiritual side. Yeah. And his little sister, who is dying of a kidney disease, is trying to get him ready for her passing. But I don't want to tell you anymore, because then it ruins the story. But so Walks with the Wind is kind of the persecution of this young man, and Catching the Wind is the resurrection and his love story, where he meets a young lady who's going through a difficult time, and she happens to be the fictional girls soccer coach at Blue Valley High School, because I lived very close to Blue Valley, and I was just a fan of theirs.
Yeah. That's wonderful. Steve, your humanity is so overwhelmingly refreshing. This has been an absolute honor. Thank you for giving me a tiny slice and portal into your world, and best of luck with everything. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I love to talk about books and baseball. And if you're interested, you can go to stevephysioc.com or just go on Facebook. And I'm there, both my Steve Physioc page and my Steve Physioc author page.
Yes,
Joe,
sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Take care.